Hi, my name's Emily Reiss, and I'm the Assistant Director in the Office of Career Services. Today, I'm going to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, which is all about interviewing. I'm going to go over some tips and tricks to help you feel more confident and prepared going in for your next interview. So let's get started. As we begin, I want you to think about any interview that you've ever had. Now, this could be an interview that you had for a part-time job, a full-time job, a position on campus, or even just an organization that you were applying for. As you reflect on that interview, I want you to try to describe your feelings that you had before and during the interview. And as we dig a little bit deeper, think about some of the emotions that you experienced. Did you feel really confident and prepared for that interview, or were you a little more anxious and nervous and didn't quite know how to answer the questions? Typically, the latter is what we find most common with students. Oftentimes, we hear that it's hard to talk about yourself, interviews are intimidating and scary. And so, I really want to break down some of that stigma. I want to help you feel confident going into your interview. And so, we're going to talk through a couple different things today. I'm going to tell you how to prepare for your interview, what to do as you arrive, the actual interview process, and some commonly asked questions, how you should end the interview and what you should do when you get home, as well as different types of interviewing and then resources that we offer here in the Office of Career Services. So, a lot of times people think that there isn't much prep work for an interview, that you just apply for a job, get the interview, show up, and see what happens. And really, there should be so much preparation happening on the back end before you even start applying for jobs and you accept that interview. So you really want to start with some self-knowledge and self-exploration first. You have to know yourself to know how you want to present yourself during the interview and at this company. So start by thinking about your values, your interests, and your skills. What do those look like to you, especially in the workplace? What are some of the things that you value? What are you looking for in a company? What kind of interest area do you have? And then what are some of your skills? What are you good at? And how does this apply to the company that you'd like to work for? Next, you should think about your experience. This can be previous or current experience. Any jobs that you've ever had, any organizations or activities that you've been involved with, think about these, how they can relate to the position that you're applying for, and how you can find some parallels there. Then you'll want to think about some of your personal qualifications. What have you done? What are some things that set you apart from everyone else who might be applying for this position? Finally, you'll want to think about your career goals and your objective. So every job that you have should really be pushing you towards that ultimate career goal. You want to think more than just 1 year into the future. Start thinking about what some of your 5, 10-year long-term goals are and be able to articulate that during your interview. The next part of preparing for an interview is research. And so you really want to find out as much information as you can about the company and position. You can do this by looking at their website, checking out their social media pages, or even looking at their LinkedIn profile. In this day and age, everything you need is on the internet. You can pretty much find any kind of information you're looking for. So you really want to use that to your advantage as you're applying for jobs and accepting interviews. You want to look at a company's website. Can you find their mission statement? Do they have a motto? What kind of pictures and things are they promoting on their website? Do they have outreach into the community? Who are some of the top people that work at that company and what are their interest areas? So you really want to go into an interview knowing a lot of this information, and that will help you answer their questions and be prepared for what they're going to ask you, but it will also help you to craft questions that you want to ask them as you're learning more about the company. You also want to think about where you're going. So make sure you know the address, you know where it's located, you've looked it up on maps, you know the route that you're going to use to get there, and you've factored in things like time change and traffic, so that way you'll be on time for your interview. Another really important piece of the interview process is dressing professionally. So today I'm going to talk to you about the difference between business casual versus business professional. Now on the left side of the screen, you'll see what we're going to refer to as business casual. So this will be what you'll typically wear in your normal office environment, whether you're an intern or starting that full-time professional job. So for ladies, this can be either trouser pants, it can be a dress or a knee-length skirt. You're usually going to want to wear flats, but heels are acceptable. You can wear patterns, a little bit more patterns when we're thinking about business casual. So this is where a nice blouse would come into play. You can put on a cardigan and a jacket to dress it up a little bit, but this would just be your typical office environment type look. For men, it's going to be very similar. You'll want to wear khaki pants or a nice trouser, a typical kind of casual dress shoe, and you're still going to want to wear a shirt with a collar. So this can be a polo or a button up, but a tie is not required for business casual. Now you can still throw on a jacket or add a vest if you want to dress things up a little bit more. On the right side of the screen, you'll see what we're going to refer to as business professional. And you can see that this kind of takes it up a step. Typically, when we speak of business professional, we're speaking of a full suit. And so you'll see here, you're going to want to keep it to some pretty neutral colors. The colors that we're typically going to recommend are black, gray, maybe a dark brown or a navy blue. Something that's still a very kind of traditional classic color scheme is going to be ideal when you're thinking about dressing business professional. For ladies, again, this can be pants or a skirt. Just be careful of the length. You can wear flats or a low heel. Just try to think about being comfortable and something that you can actually walk around in during your interview. You're going to want to keep your shirts pretty plain, usually like one color, not too many patterns when you're going business professional. Same thing for men, so your standard traditional colors, probably black and gray, are going to be best. Nice dress shoes, and then a collared shirt with a tie. And so the reason we're thinking about dressing professionally is this really tells a lot about a person. And so you want to come in prepared, dressing for the part. Typically, we're going to say this is the time to be the most conservative, professional version of yourself. And so that's why we're going to recommend a full dark colored suit as well as a neutral color palette when we're thinking about an interview. So you'll see here I've put together some business casual examples. This would be something that you could wear in your everyday office environment, whether to your internship or to your full or part-time job. And so for the men on the left side of the screen, you'll see a nice dark trouser with some dress shoes and a belt, and then a collared button down. And you can wear a tie, but you don't have to when we're thinking business casual. In the middle, we've got just a variety of different looks for both men and women. You'll notice dress and skirts for women as well, and then a pretty decent length heel. On the right side of the screen, you'll see more options for women, so a nice blouse, trouser pants, and again, this is where you can add a little bit more color and patterns. So for your business professional examples, you'll see a lot of dark suits, mostly black. We also have a few gray on the right side of the screen. If you look at everybody's shoes, they're going to be closed-toed shoes, ladies, a nice heel length, just because you might have to go on a tour while you're there taking an interview. You might have to park far away, and so you want to make sure you're wearing something that you feel confident and comfortable in, and that's easy for you to walk around in. So you'll see nice dark colors, very professional for the business professional look. I wanted to show you some examples of things not to wear, and so we'll go over why these may not be the best options. On the far left side of the screen, this is just not a very professional look. Her heels, you can tell, are very tall. Her skirt could be a little bit longer, and her blouse is not very professional. So you want to avoid this kind of look at an interview. The next picture is jeans and a polo, which is very nice. You might could wear this on casual Friday, but not something that you should wear to your interview. The next suit, I kind of like it myself, but it's, again, a lot more patterned, probably something that you would not want to wear to show off your most conservative version of yourself. I think the lady next with the jeans and the jacket looks really nice. Again, this would be great for maybe an office look, a casual Friday look, but you don't want to wear jeans going into an interview. Same thing with the next man. His shirt's a little casual and it's not tucked in, so therefore that's not a good look for an interview. And then the lady on the right actually has a really nice suit, but again, that's not the color scheme that we're going for when we're talking about the most professional version of yourself for an interview. Okay, so we want to think about what should we bring with us to our interview? What do we need to prepare ahead of time? So you're going to want to have extra copies of your resume, your cover letter, and your references. They probably won't ask you for this because they're usually going to already have it, but sometimes they'll bring in a bigger panel, maybe ask somebody to come sit in on the interview day of, and it looks really nice and that you're really prepared when you can pull out a copy of your resume and leave it with them at the end of the interview. It's also helpful if you can bring in a folder or a portfolio, a pad folio, something that has a pocket where you can put your resume in, and then a place where you can take notes, either during or right after the interview. This is also helpful to write down some questions or things that you would like to try to remember to ask them during your interview. And it sounds silly, but you're also going to want to bring a smile. Now, I talked at the beginning that interviews are kind of scary. People feel anxious sometimes. And so it can be really hard to kind of relax and be yourself. But that's really what they want to get to know during the interview is who are you, kind of what's your personality. So try to relax, smile a little bit, and be yourself throughout the interview. Some things that you're going to want to be careful not to bring in with you are your cell phone. You don't really want to be using that once you arrive kind of at that organization or on campus. You want to tuck that away and not have that out with you. And you also don't want to be chewing gum or eating food right before the interview. So make sure that you spit all of that out, leave it in the car, so that way you walk into the building ready to go. Okay, so when we're thinking about arriving for the interview, I'm always going to suggest that you arrive about 10 minutes early, but no more than 15. So you want to get there on time. You want to make sure that you have time to figure out where you're going, that you can get checked in with whomever you need to get checked in with. But you don't want to arrive too early and put a lot of pressure on the interview panel. One, because they might be in their office trying to get things done, and then you get there early and it throws off their whole timeline. And two, because typically they're going to be interviewing multiple people on the same day. And so you're going to want to make sure that you give them enough time to stick to schedule. Like I mentioned before, you're not going to want to use your cell phone once you enter the building. And so I suggest that once you park in the parking lot, you text everybody that you need to, say you made it, and then just go ahead and silence or turn off your cell phone. We don't want you to sit in the lobby, scroll through social media once you're in the building. We want you to kind of focus on the interview at hand, smile, and be professional the whole time without any distractions. It's also important to be kind to everyone that you meet once you've arrived. So this is anybody that you meet on the company grounds, whether it's outside, whether it's the janitor, the secretary that you check in with, because sometimes these people are actually there to help judge the interview process. So the secretary will typically have a lot of weight in the decision, and they kind of weigh in with their boss on what they witnessed and saw while each candidate was waiting. So you just want to be really mindful of that once you step foot onto the grounds. Okay, so then during the interview, once we get started, when you're greeted by the interviewer or interviewers, if it's a panel, you want to make sure that you look everyone in the eyes, greet them, and typically give them a firm handshake. You'll kind of want to read the room to see if that's an appropriate thing, but usually it's, direct eye contact, a handshake, or some sort of welcome. During introductions, you want to make sure that your speech is calm and clear. Now, again, we talked about how it's okay to be a little bit nervous during an interview, but we don't want to focus on that. We want to take a deep breath, try to remain calm, and get through your speech as calmly and clearly as you can. When you sit down, you can put your hands either on your lap or on the table, but be careful not to try to fidget. So don't play with your watch or your rings or twiddle your thumbs. Just try to sit there kind of very still, very calmly. And once you sit down and are in your chair, don't spin, don't rock. Try not to fidget. Just very confidently sit in your chair. It'll help you if you keep your feet either on the floor or cross them at the ankles, and then kind of sit up straight and lean slightly forward to show that you're interested and engaged throughout that interview process. Also really important to make eye contact with everyone while the interview is going on. So again, if you have a panel of interviewers, you're going to want to make sure that you're looking at every single person as you're answering those questions. So try to make everybody feel engaged and involved throughout your interview. Okay, so a couple more interview do's and don'ts. So again, you're going to want to smile. You're going to want to look approachable and personable. Kind of let your personality show. Let them get a glimpse of what that is. You want to think before you speak. So make sure that you are listening to the question thoroughly. You kind of have an example of something that you want to say in mind, and then you start to elaborate on that. You also want to be careful to provide solid examples. So don't just say, yes, I've done that, or yes, I have experience in that field. Try to think about an example from your past work experience or activities that you've been involved with to actually provide a detailed, solid example for your interviewers. Other things you don't want to do is tell the interviewer that you're nervous. Like I said, a lot of times they're going to know that you're nervous, but you don't have to keep apologizing or keep letting them know how nervous that you are. You just want to try to be confident and answer the questions the best that you can. Also, try not to ramble or cover too much information with one answer. Now, we want to give more than a one word or one sentence answer, but we also don't want to spend 5 minutes trying to answer one question. Typically, your interviewers are going to have a long list of questions that they're trying to work their way through, so make sure that you give a good detailed answer, but don't try to cover everything all at one time. And never ever be negative about a current or previous boss or employer. So don't never shed negative light on that. If it was a bad situation, try to think ahead of time of how you want to explain that and how you can be positive moving forward. So a couple basic interview questions that we'll talk through. These are usually ones that you're going to encounter, especially this first one. So tell me a little bit about yourself. This one is usually pretty tricky for students and something that kind of catches them off guard and they don't know how to answer. But I can pretty much guarantee this will be the first question that you're asked, so you want to make sure you're really prepared for it. When an interviewer asks you this question, they're not trying to find out personal details about you. They don't need to know everything about your life, where you grew up, those kind of things. They really want to know academically and experience based a little bit about yourself. So you can say things like what year you are in school, what your major is, where you go to school, and then you kind of want to elaborate on what your interest is and why you're applying for this position. So start to try to show why you're interested in this company and this job specifically. Typically, you're going to be asked questions about what are your strengths and your weaknesses. Again, these can be really challenging questions to answer, but if you come in prepared ahead of time, it's definitely going to help you. So when thinking about your strengths, you want to think about what are some things that are going to be really necessary in the job that you're applying for, and then what are some of your strengths in that field. Be sure to provide some solid examples. So if you're a great communicator and your job is going to involve a lot of one-on-one or group communication, then that's definitely something that you would want to elaborate on. Kind of the same thing with your weaknesses. We don't want to pick something that is detrimental or required for the job. And you don't want to shine a negative light on yourself. So you want to avoid saying things like, well, I'm a procrastinator, or I'm always late, or I have a bad attitude. You want to think about something that you know is your weakness, but you've already taken some steps to overcome and kind of combat that. Some examples that people use are sometimes communication or delegation, and then they talk about how they're aware of it and how they're working to develop those skills. We talked about goals earlier, so a question that you'll typically see is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? What they're getting at is, what are your professional goals? Are you going to stick around with this company, or are you going to tell me right now that you think you'll be gone within a year or two? So think about professionally, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Don't answer this question and say married or with kids or having a dog. Answer it professionally and academically. They might ask you what your greatest accomplishment is. Again, you're going to want to keep this professional, so something that relates to your schooling or your workplace that you're really proud of. They might ask you, why do you want this position, or why do you want to work for this company? And this goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, all about research. So thinking about the research that you've done about that company and about that position, and how can you apply that to your interest in the position. And then they might say, we're interviewing several other candidates. Why should we hire you? And this is the time to think about those personal qualifications that you have, anything that you didn't get to mention, or something that will set you apart, that will show them why you are the best fit for that company. There's going to be several other types of questions too. So there's some ambiguous type questions. Let me put all these up here. Some ambiguous type questions. So it might be like, how do you want me to remember you? Or like what we just talked about, there are blank other number of applicants. Why should we hire you? And so that's really more about trying to sell yourself to that position. Sometimes you might be asked some out-of-the-box questions. So things like, what are you currently reading? Or if you were a tree or a crayon, what kind would you be? What's the best restaurant you've ever eaten at? There's no right or wrong question here. They're just trying to get you to loosen up a little bit and get a feeling for your personality. They might also ask you questions related to academics. And so they might say, why did you choose your current major? Or how did your major help prepare you for the workplace? How do you study and prepare for your exams? Again, not really a right or wrong answer here, but you want to think about how you can shine yourself in a positive light and answer some of these questions. Other questions that you may encounter, things related to your social skills or your interest areas. So they might start to ask you things about leadership roles that you've ever had, or if you've ever done volunteer work, and they're trying to just get to know you a little bit outside of your academics and what other things are you passionate about. They may ask you questions about stress and how you handle that. Again, so not a right or wrong question, but they're just trying to get a feel for how you handle stress and how you might fit in that company. Situational questions, so these can be related to anything specific to your career or your industry. So if you're a teacher, these might be about your classroom management or your curriculum style. If you're in a computer science major, this might be something about the programs that you know and different things that you put together. So make sure you're aware of your field and some of the questions that they might ask you there. They also might ask you some personality-oriented questions, and so these are things like, how would your friend describe you, or what would a coworker, what word would they use to describe you? What are you most proud of? And so they're just trying to, again, learn a little bit more about you. Okay, so at the end of the interview, typically they're always going to say, do you have any questions for me or for us? And your answer always needs to be yes. Now, again, this goes back to what we talked about at the beginning about preparation. And so you're going to want to have researched the company and try to prepare a few questions ahead of time. Now, they might answer some of those questions throughout the job interview, and that's perfectly fine. But if you've written down 3 to 5 questions, typically you'll still have 1 to 2 to be able to ask at the end. And so you always want to say yes, because this shows that you're interested in the position and that you've thought about some things before you walked in those doors. So some questions that you might want to ask, anything in the job description that you want clarified or something that you saw on the website that you want to ask more questions about. You can ask, is there a training position for this, training period for this position? Will I have a mentor, or is there a mentorship or leadership program here at this company? What's the biggest challenge of someone starting in this position? What's the office environment like, or what's your day-to-day activities like? Now, you don't want to ask any questions that could easily be found on the website or that were listed in the job description, but these are things that will really help you get to understand the company and make a good decision on if this is going to be a good fit for you or not. You're going to want to avoid questions about salary and benefits. So those are really common questions and questions that we all have. How much money will I be making? How many days off will I get? What kind of benefits are offered? Really good questions, and questions that you're going to want to have the answer to as you're accepting the job. So my advice is that you're going to want to save those questions, let the interview wrap up. If they call you and offer you the job, that's the time to dive into all of the details, because then you know that they want you, they're interested in you, and they'll probably have a little bit more wiggle room to get some things done that are going to benefit you. So when the interview's over, you're going to want to, again, thank everyone, either shake their hand, give them good eye contact, smile at them, and just really thank them for the time that they took out of their day to meet with you. Let them know that you're very interested and that you just really appreciate their time. Once you left the interview, when you kind of get to your car, when you get home, this is where you're going to want to take out that portfolio again, write down the pros and the cons. What went well? What were some questions that really threw you off that you want to work on if you ever have another interview? Write down anything you can think of about the interview, including the people's names of who you met with. And this is really important, because the last thing I'm going to tell you to do is to send a thank you note. Now, this kind of seems silly and isn't really common practice anymore. Thank you, 2 really, really important words that are not used often enough. So you could send a thank you email, and usually that's appropriate, or you could also write a little handwritten note and either mail it in or walk it back into the secretary and leave that there. You want to do this within like 24 to 48 hours, typically because people are going to be making their decisions quickly. This is good because it makes you look good. It shows kind of your personality and what kind of person you are, but it's also going to bring your name across their desk one more time, just to remind them of your name and your interview. Okay, so a couple other things I want to go over is just different types of interviews that you might want to be prepared for. Virtual interviews are really common, especially right now. And so usually what we're finding is that companies will conduct a virtual interview first. And that's how they weed out multiple candidates and they decide who they want to bring in to have an in-person interview. So when you're thinking about being prepared with your virtual interview, you want to do all those other things that we talked about, but there's also a few more things you're going to want to work on. So you're going to want to make sure that you've tested your technology. Your computer's charged, you're logged onto the internet, you're going to have reliable Wi-Fi during that interview time. You've tested your microphone, your camera, you've tested the platform that you're going to be using, and that you're familiar with what that looks like. Even though it's virtual, you're still going to want to dress the part. So again, you're still going to want to dress business professional for these things. And I would say put on your whole suit just in case, because you never know if something would happen, you'd have to get up and stand up. You don't want to be wearing your pajamas or anything like that. And you also want to monitor your body language. So it's kind of hard virtually to feel like you're really interacting and engaging with someone. So be extra cautious of what your body language is saying. Before you sit down, make sure that you've prepared your surroundings. Look at what's on the walls behind you. Take down distracting pictures and posters. Really, a blank wall is going to be best. Make sure that you've looked at that. You've gotten your pets put away, your children not going to be at the house, your roommate's not going to that's not going to walk in the middle of your interview. Really make sure you've thought about all of those things and minimize whatever distractions. So that includes turning off your cell phone, turning off your Apple Watch, those kind of things, so that way you can be really engaged in that interview. Then you're going to want to sit down and be prepared with everything that you'll need. So have your list of questions, have your portfolio ready. You don't want to have to get up and run away in the middle of your interview and come back. Another very common type of interview is a phone interview. And again, these are often done before they'll bring you for a virtual interview or an in-person interview. So when you're thinking about being on the phone, it's not something that most of us are used to anymore. So you want to think about some common practices. We've talked about smiling a lot. That's still going to be important here. You're going to try to be personable and let that flow across the phone so that way the interviewers can pick up on that. Just because they can't see you, you still want to be really cautious about what you're doing. So you don't want to be chewing gum, eating or drinking or anything like that when you're on the phone. Sit down in a chair and really treat it like an in-person interview. Try to focus in on that, and that way you'll be successful. On the phone, sometimes it can be hard to know if the person's actually done talking. So try not to interrupt the interviewer, let them finish their question, a few seconds of silence, and then you begin your response. You just want to be careful with the flow of what that looks like over the phone. You really want to focus, try to listen to what they're saying, focus in on the questions, and then really enunciate your answers so that way that can be carried across the phone. You're also going to want to provide short, detailed answers. So just like in an in-person interview, you're not going to want to give 5-minute long answers. It's really hard to engage with someone like that over the phone. So make sure that you're providing detailed answers, but you're keeping them a little bit shorter so that way they can stay focused with you over the phone. So one great resource that we have to offer through the Office of Career Services is called Big Interview, and this is an online mock interview software. So just like we just mentioned, a lot of your first round of interviews are going to be virtual, so what better way to practice than in a virtual platform? I've got the link here. It's troy.biginterview.com/login, and that's where you'll go to set up your account. There are a lot of cool things you can do when you're on this website. So there's going to be several preloaded interviews already here from the people at Big Interview. You might even be in a class sometime where your professor uploads their own interview questions and assigns this to you for class. So when you log into Big Interview, you can choose just the general questions, which are some of those most commonly asked questions that we went through, or you can choose to practice by industry, and that's what I've pulled up here on the screen. So kind of no matter whatever your major is, whatever area you're interested in going into, there's some specific questions for that field. So I would definitely go in there and check some of those questions out. And I pulled a screenshot here to show you what it looks like when you're inside a Big Interview. So you'll see the questions on the left-hand side of the screen. You'll see your virtual interviewer. It's a recorded video. And so this question is, tell me about yourself. So you push play, he'll lean in and he'll say, tell me about yourself. And then your screen will pop up and you have a few seconds and then you can click start recording and you can answer your question. You can listen back to it and re-record it, and then you'll be able to save it and move on to the next question. Again, this is really helpful to help you practice, to hear yourself, to see yourself, to know if there's anything that you need to change and work on to get better throughout the interview. Now, once you're done with this interview, you can save it so that way you can watch it later. You can send it to your professor for help. You can send it to your family or friends, or you can email it to us in the Office of Career Services, and we'll be glad to review it and provide some feedback as well. We also offer in-person mock interviews or virtual live mock interviews, but we're going to ask that you complete big interview first just to get that first round of practice, and then we are happy to take a deep dive into whatever other questions you may have about the interview process. So I've got our information here on the screen. If you have any questions, you can give us a call, send us an email, or look on our website for a lot more tips and tricks and information about what we offer. You can also follow us on social media at Troy U Career for just different career tips that we'll post and events that we host. And so I've got all of that listed on the screen. I hope that this made you feel a lot more confident, and now you're ready to go into that next job interview, knowing those tips and tricks, really feeling confident, professional, and ready to tackle that next interview. If we can ever help you, please don't hesitate to reach out to us in the Office of Career Services.